At 0:16 hours on the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, the Normandy night is no longer quiet. Across the darkened countryside, a radio signal crackles into existence, fragmented, breathless, uncertain. A frontline observer reports shapes in the sky. Parachutes. The dull roar of engines, then silence. Men falling out of cloud. It is not phrased as certainty. It never is. War rarely announces itself clearly at first. Inside a small German headquarters, lit by shaded lamps and cigarette glow, a duty officer listens. He has heard similar reports before. Exercises mistaken for attacks. Nervous sentries seeing ghosts. The Atlantic Wall has trained its defenders to expect alarms and to survive them by filtering most of them out. He notes the message. He does not ignore it. But neither does he elevate it with urgency. It joins other fragments of the night, waiting to be confirmed. This is how delays are born, not in negligence, but in routine. The report is written down, perhaps placed in a folder, perhaps set aside until another signal arrives to give it weight. The chain of command above him sleeps, or waits, or demands certainty before motion. In this system, caution is professionalism. Speed is risk. And risk, if wrong, is punished. Outside, the night begins to change character. The horizon flickers not with lightning, but with flares. Tracer fire stitches brief lines through the dark. Somewhere nearby, weapons open up in short, sharp bursts. This is no distant disturbance. The sound is close enough to feel personal. Too close to be a drill. Too coordinated to be chance. Then come the first shots near the headquarters perimeter. Sudden. Flat. Unmistakable. This is not a possible raid anymore. This is contact. The geography of the war has shifted in minutes, but the maps on the wall have not yet caught up. The warning that might have redrawn them is still trapped at the level of ink and paper. In war, information has no value until it moves. A warning unheard is identical to a warning never sent. Between the sound of the radio and the movement of men lies a fragile space where outcomes are decided. At 0:16 hours, that space is filled not with fear or cowardice, but with time slipping away. And as the night deepens over Normandy, the absence that will matter most is not firepower, or resolve, or even awareness, but the minutes already lost, while shapes continue to fall silently out of the sky. The gliders arrive without warning, without ceremony. Wooden frames tear across Norman fields and hedgerows, skidding, splintering, breaking apart on impact. There is no engine note to announce them, no long approach to track, only the sudden violence of landing and then silence. From the wreckage, men rise quickly, already oriented, already moving. What the glider lacks in elegance, it repays in surprise. A nearby German outpost registers movement in the dark. Shapes where there were none moments before. Figures advancing low, purposeful, disciplined. The sentries hesitate, not from fear, but from uncertainty. Are these scattered parachutists blown off course? A diversion meant to draw fire? Or the opening act of something far larger? In the night, classification becomes survival, and hesitation becomes its enemy. The answer arrives too fast. The first defenders are engaged almost immediately, outnumbered not by overwhelming force, but by coherence. The men coming out of the gliders know exactly where they are meant to be. They move toward bridges, road junctions, field edges, points that matter even if the defenders do not yet know why. Within seconds, firing positions are flanked. Within minutes, the balance shifts irreversibly. Orders do not arrive to correct the situation. The field telephones are silent, lines cut or never connected. Radios crackle with partial messages, overlapping voices, static drowning meaning. Each small position waits for guidance that cannot travel fast enough through a system already strained. Confusion spreads laterally, from post to post, faster than any formal command. The position does not fall because the defenders lack weapons, ammunition, or resolve. It falls because they lose orientation. They cannot tell where the main threat is, or where support might come from, or whether holding ground here serves any purpose at all. The night reshapes itself around them, turning familiar terrain into an unsolved problem. Gunfire redraws the map in real time. Roads become liabilities. Open ground becomes exposure. Hedges become borders between survival and capture. The lesson is immediate and unforgiving. Geography now belongs to whoever understands it first. On a staff map, this collapse will later appear as a minor indentation, barely worth a symbol. But history rarely announces itself at scale. Sometimes it enters through a narrow opening, created in darkness by men who arrive silently and leave confusion behind. And through that opening, larger forces are already beginning to move toward a line that was never meant to be broken so soon. For months before June 1944, Germany has been waiting for the invasion. It is not a question of if, but where. Certainty, however, carries two meanings in war. It can produce readiness, or it can harden expectation. Along the Channel coast, both take shape at once. Concrete is poured. Guns are emplaced. Sectors are mapped and rehearsed. Yet behind this preparation lies a quieter assumption that the enemy will behave logically, and that logic will be visible in advance. The Atlantic Wall reflects that belief. It is formidable where it can be seen: beaches, ports, approaches that appear obvious on a map. It is less prepared for an enemy that does not arrive in a line, but in fragments. Parachutes drifting inland. Gliders landing behind a wire. The wall faces outward. The invasion now unfolding arrives from within its blind spots. German defences are layered by design, strong points, reserves, counterattack forces held back for the decisive moment. But command is layered as well. Authority moves vertically, not laterally. Initiative is constrained by permission, and permission by certainty. The system functions best when the threat is clear, identifiable, and confirmed by multiple channels. It struggles when the first signals are ambiguous. The Allied plan understands this. It aims not only at territory, but at cognition. The target is the German nervous system: how quickly reports move, how decisions are authorized, how belief solidifies. Deception operations have spent months shaping expectations, feeding patterns the German command has learned to trust. When the real invasion begins, it does not announce itself loudly, it competes with those expectations for attention. Radar screens show intermittent contacts. Radios fill with incomplete reports. Observers describe flashes, engines, shapes that do not align neatly with doctrine. All of this arrives in the early hours of the morning, when fatigue dulls judgment and repetition breeds skepticism. Information is abundant, but belief is scarce. At first, the invasion is more technical than human. It is navigation measured in seconds. Timetables aligned across hundreds of miles. Weapons synchronized not just to fire, but to arrive. Violence follows precision, not the other way around. Only later will men experience it as chaos and fear. This is where the scale shifts. A single delayed report matters most when the entire system assumes time exists. The listener now sees the shape of the story, an enemy conditioned to expect lateness, confronted by an operation designed to exploit every minute. And somewhere within that gap between expectation and arrival, the invasion is already deciding its outcome. Within the German High Command, the invasion has long been framed as a problem of geometry. The shortest distance between England and France points to Pas-de-Calais, and logic, reinforced by history, suggests that this is where the decisive blow must fall. Rail lines converge there. Ports lie ready. Air cover is shorter. On maps and in briefings, Calais becomes not just a possibility, but a conclusion reached in advance. The Allies understand this mental terrain as well as the physical one. Through months of deception, they cultivate German logic until it hardens into habit. False units appear on aerial reconnaissance. Radio traffic simulates formations that do not exist. Double agents confirm what Berlin already believes. Over time, expectation no longer feels like a guess. It feels like knowledge. This belief shapes how information is judged. Reports from Normandy arrive filtered through an assumption whatever happens there must be secondary. A diversion. A probe meant to pull forces away from the real landing to come. Command structures reinforce this thinking by design. A report is not accepted as truth until it climbs the hierarchy, is compared against other reports, and returns downward stamped with authority. At the local level, officers learn this lesson early. Initiative carries risk. Acting too soon can mean acting alone, and acting alone can end a career. The safest error is inaction, waiting for confirmation, waiting for orders, waiting for certainty that never fully arrives. In this environment, discipline becomes indistinguishable from delay. Speed, once a virtue in maneuver warfare, is redefined as a liability. To move quickly on uncertain information is to gamble one's command. To wait is to align oneself with procedure. The system rewards those who do not disrupt it, even as the battlefield begins to do exactly that. What appears as caution is, in practice, a form of paralysis sanctioned from above. The duty officer listening to the radio in the early hours of the 6th of June is a product of this culture. His hesitation is not born of disbelief, nor of fear. It is born of training. He has learned that most alarms are wrong, that premature action is dangerous, and that the correct response to ambiguity is restraint. His decision reflects the institution standing behind him. This is where arrogance enters the story, not loudly, not theatrically. It appears as confidence in predictability, a belief that the enemy will choose the obvious path, that the future will unfold according to logic already approved. That time, once possessed, cannot be taken away without notice. But war rarely punishes arrogance in its most visible form. It punishes it quietly, through assumptions left unchallenged and minutes quietly lost. As German command waits for the invasion it expects, another one is already unfolding elsewhere, testing a system designed to be careful, methodical, and above all, slow. The German defensive system in Normandy depends on communication as much as concrete. Orders move along wires stretched across fields and hedgerows, buried shallow, vulnerable but efficient. Field telephones connect outposts to battalions, battalions to regiments, forming a network that functions with impressive speed when intact. When cut, it fails completely, leaving silence where certainty was expected. Radios exist to compensate for this fragility, but they are never a perfect substitute. They offer mobility and reach, yet they also invite interception, jamming, and misinterpretation. Discipline governs their use. Transmissions must be brief, precise, and authorized. At night, under pressure, that discipline becomes difficult to maintain. Too many voices speak at once. Others remain silent, unsure whether they are permitted to speak at all. As the early hours of the 6th of June unfold, reports begin to arrive in fragments. An observer sees flares to the west. Another hears gunfire inland. A third reports parachutes but cannot estimate numbers or direction. The word possible appears repeatedly: possible airborne, possible landing, possible diversion. Each message contains information, yet none carries enough certainty to dominate the picture. The fog of war asserts itself in physical form. Static interferes with transmissions. Batteries weaken faster than expected. Operators hunch over sets in dim light, straining to separate signal from noise. Timestamps blur. Locations are approximate. In this environment, clarity is not lost all at once, it erodes minute by minute. Every minute lost at the lowest level multiplies as messages climb the hierarchy. What begins as a delay of seconds at an outpost becomes hesitation at battalion level, then debate at regimental command. By the time a decision is authorized, the situation it addresses has already changed. The system assumes warning will arrive early enough to matter. When it does not, the entire structure falls behind reality. A single missed call is rarely decisive on its own. Its power lies in what it disrupts. Defensive plans depend on synchronization, reserves moving while positions still hold, counterattacks launched before footholds become strong points. When communication falters, these plans unravel quietly, without drama, until their failure becomes visible on the ground. Technology, often imagined as a solution to human limitation, reveals its true nature here. It does not eliminate uncertainty or hesitation. It channels them. Weakness is no longer distributed evenly among men. It is concentrated into switches, relays, operators, and moments of judgment. One decision to wait, to clarify, to confirm can outweigh entire battalions in consequence. As the German signal web strains under the weight of ambiguity, the night continues to fill with reports that sound increasingly urgent. Yet urgency without coherence cannot move armies. And while messages compete for attention across wires and airwaves, the enemy is already exploiting the silence between them, advancing through gaps created not by firepower, but by delay. The German coastal defences in Normandy are formidable, but they are oriented in a single direction. Bunkers face the sea. Guns are calibrated for landing craft, bombardment, and the visible violence of an assault arriving head-on. The system is designed to absorb shock from the front to survive hours of shelling before the first enemy sets foot on sand. It is not designed for silence behind the line, for gliders sliding into hedgerow fields without warning. To make this defence work, units are spread thin along the coast and inland. Strength is held back deliberately, conserved for the moment of decision, the main blow that doctrine insists will come. This dispersal assumes time to identify the primary landing, time to shift reserves, time to concentrate force where it matters most. If that time disappears, the structure weakens everywhere at once. Leadership reflects this logic. Reaction forces exist, but they are precious and tightly controlled. Movement requires authorization, often from commanders far from the sound of gunfire. The intent is coherence, not speed. A premature counterattack risks exhausting reserves in the wrong place. A delayed one risks never arriving at all. The system chooses the former danger as less acceptable than the latter. The night shift embodies this choice. Staffed by men accustomed to false alarms and long hours, it is trained to separate panic from fact. Reports are weighed, cross-checked, and sometimes set aside until corroboration arrives. Fatigue plays its part. Judgment slows. Skepticism becomes a survival skill. In the quiet hours before dawn, restraint feels responsible. The duty officer on watch becomes more than an individual. He is the human interface between uncertainty and action, the final filter before the alarm bell rings. His role is not to react, but to assess. Not to imagine worst cases, but to prevent them from cascading upward unnecessarily. When he delays, he does so in accordance with the system's values. And when he delays, the system delays with him. Because it was built not to move fast, but to avoid moving wrongly. False alarms are the enemy this structure knows how to fight. Surprise is not. Every safeguard against panic becomes a barrier against speed, and every safeguard is now activated at once. This is where belief becomes vulnerability. The defense assumes the next war will resemble the last one, clear warnings, visible concentrations, time to respond. It assumes the enemy will announce himself loudly from the sea and give defenders the courtesy of recognition before commitment. But beyond the concrete and the wire, the night is already teaching a different lesson. The war has arrived quietly, without permission, and without regard for expectations. And while the wall waits for the blow it understands, men are moving in its shadow, testing a system that has not yet realized it is already out of date. The airborne forces descending over Normandy are often remembered as infantry dropped from the sky. In reality, they are something more precise. They are logistics calculated in advance, geometry imposed on darkness, and time broken down into seconds that must align across continents. Each paratrooper and glider pilot is only the visible end of a long equation solved months earlier on maps, tables, and clocks. Darkness, which normally erases orientation, has been studied and reproposed. Navigation aids blink briefly and then vanish. Pathfinders land first, marking drop zones with lights visible only at specific angles. Colored signals identify fields and hedgerows that, in daylight, would look identical. The night is no longer empty space. It has been converted into a structured environment, one that rewards those who arrive knowing exactly where they are meant to be. Gliders are central to this design. Silent, fragile, and unforgiving, they carry not only men but shape. Artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, jeeps, items that parachutes cannot deliver accurately, are concentrated at precise points inland. Bridges, road junctions, narrow causeways, places where movement either flows or stops entirely. These are not random landings. They are deliberate insertions of mass into the joints of the German defence. The Allies understand that sound is expectation. Engines mean bombers. Bombardment means coastline. Silence means nothing unless silence itself is weaponized. Gliders land without warning, and paratroopers descend into areas that are quiet precisely because the Germans do not expect fighting there yet. The absence of noise delays reaction. By the time shots are fired, positions are already compromised. This is not improvisation. It is a planned exploitation of habit. German doctrine expects warning, escalation, and confirmation. The Allied plan denies all three. It introduces ambiguity at every level, forcing defenders to interpret events without a framework they trust. Small actions are designed to appear isolated, even as they form part of a larger pattern invisible from the ground. Deception reinforces this uncertainty. False radio traffic simulates landings where none exist. Dummy parachutists descend into empty countryside, triggering reports that compete with real ones. Aircraft fly misleading routes. Signals overlap and contradict. The Germans receive more information than they can process and less clarity than they need. What they think they know becomes unreliable. Innovation here is practical rather than dramatic. It is not about new weapons, but about how to apply existing ones differently. How to land men and heavy equipment close enough together to fight immediately. How to ensure that units scattered by wind and fire still converge on objectives that matter. How to maintain coherence in chaos long enough to seize ground that reshapes everything that follows. Timing binds all of this together. Airborne landings are synchronized with naval movements, beach assaults, and follow-on waves still hours away. Each action assumes the others will occur on schedule. If one element is delayed, the entire structure is stressed. If it succeeds, the stress is transferred to the defender instead. Surprise is not a moment, it is a condition maintained through tempo. For the men on the ground, this engineering is felt rather than seen. Orders make sense even when surroundings do not. Objectives exist even when landmarks are unclear. Units reform not because conditions are favorable, but because the plan anticipated unfavorable ones. The enemy's confusion is already priced into the operation. This is the core reversal of the night. The Germans believe the decisive battle will begin at the beaches, announced by fire and visible mass. In reality, the first battle is already underway above fields, along roads, inside radio nets, and within command structures forced to react without time. Before the first landing craft touches sand, the contest has shifted inland, where silence has done the work bombardment was meant to do. By the time dawn approaches, the shape of the day has already been altered. Roads are no longer neutral. Bridges are no longer assumptions. And the enemy, still waiting for clarity, is beginning to discover that the most decisive fighting of D-Day has occurred where it was least expected, quietly, in the air, while the coast still sleeps. Along the German front line in Normandy, the invasion does not arrive as a single event. It arrives in pieces. One outpost reports parachutes drifting down beyond the tree line. Another reports gliders landing hard in nearby fields. A third hears engines overhead, then nothing at all. Each message is true in isolation. Together, they form a picture no one can yet assemble. Some commanders react immediately. They move men, reposition machine guns, send patrols into the dark. These officers trust their instincts and the sounds around them. Others hesitate. They have been trained to. Acting on incomplete information carries professional risk, and the penalty for being wrong is familiar. In this system, restraint is a learned reflex, reinforced over years of command. Communication degrades almost at once. Field telephone lines go dead, cut by bombardment or severed unknowingly by men moving through the dark. Runners are dispatched, but distances that seem short on a map stretch endlessly at night, under fire. Radios fill with voices speaking over one another, each unit insisting on the urgency of its own fragment of the war. Information does not stop flowing, it loses shape. As a result, small German units begin fighting isolated battles without context. A platoon defends a crossroads without knowing whether it anchors a defensive line or guards a position already bypassed. Another unit counterattacks a hedgerow, unaware that the road behind it has already been seized. Men fight with discipline and skill, but without a shared understanding of what the battle is becoming. In one sector, a platoon leader receives conflicting reports within minutes. Paratroopers to the west. Gunfire to the south. No orders from above. His men look to him for direction, weapons ready, waiting. The decision before him is simple and impossible: advance into darkness without support, or hold ground that may no longer matter. He chooses to probe forward, cautiously, because inaction feels worse than uncertainty. They encounter resistance almost immediately, organized, prepared, unexpected. The enemy is not where doctrine suggests he should be. Fire erupts at close range. The platoon pulls back, shaken but intact. No message returns from battalion headquarters to explain what they have met. The fight ends without resolution, leaving behind only questions that will not be answered before dawn. Elsewhere, ammunition stocks are sufficient. Courage is not lacking. What is missing is orientation. Men cannot tell whether they are defending a flank or standing alone. They cannot see the boundaries of the battle, only its pressure. Without knowing where friendly forces are or whether they still exist, every decision feels provisional. The tempo favors the attacker. Allied units, though scattered, know their objectives. German units, though disciplined, do not know the enemy's design. This asymmetry matters more than numbers. Each minute of uncertainty allows the airborne troops to consolidate, to turn temporary footholds into defended positions. By the time clarity begins to form, the ground truth has already changed. This is when the earlier missed warning reveals its true weight. It was not decisive because it described parachutes or gliders. It mattered because it might have synchronized belief. Without it, each subsequent report arrives too late to create momentum. Each delay compounds the next. What the Germans experience now is not sudden defeat, but accumulated lateness. The front line becomes a mosaic of local actions, brave, costly, disconnected. Some attacks succeed briefly, only to be abandoned when adjacent units fail to move. Others never begin because confirmation never comes. The chain of command still exists, but it stretches thin, unable to transmit a clear picture faster than events unfold. By the time higher headquarters begins to grasp the scope of the airborne landings, the frontline reality has already hardened. Bridges are contested. Roads are blocked. Positions that should have been temporary skirmishes have become fixed points of resistance. The Germans are no longer responding to an incursion, they are reacting to consequences. What began as a series of uncertain reports has turned into a night of irreversible decisions made in isolation. The missed warning now appears not as a single oversight, but as the first break in a chain that once promised order. And as dawn approaches, German units across Normandy begin to realize that they are not fighting an event, but the time they lost failing to believe it was real. The first outpost falls quietly, without the drama that later histories might suggest. A brief exchange of fire, a withdrawal under pressure, a position abandoned because holding it no longer makes sense. Nearby, another German position hears the gunfire and waits for instruction that does not arrive. Without orders, it remains fixed, unsure whether to advance, reinforce, or simply survive the night. German reserves begin to stir, but not as a single movement. Units receive partial authorization, conflicting instructions, or none at all. Some commanders move preemptively, others wait for confirmation that never quite reaches them. Columns form and dissolve. Vehicles turn back at junctions. Each delay fragments the response further, transforming what should have been a coordinated counterstroke into a series of isolated motions. In a small headquarters, the duty officer who first hesitated now listens to a stream of urgent reports. The tone has changed. The language is sharper. Parachutes have become firefights. Possible landings have become lost positions. The knight has passed a threshold, and he can feel it. Every message now demands action, yet each arrives too late to prevent the next crisis. The awareness that his earlier decision mattered grows heavier with every transmission. Counterattacks are launched into darkness already shaped by the enemy. German units move toward bridges only to find them occupied. They approach crossroads under the assumption of control, then encounter prepared positions covering the approaches. The Allies have not merely arrived, they have anticipated response. Fire comes from directions the Germans did not expect, along routes that should have been secure. Confusion begins to inflict its own casualties. Units collide in narrow roads, misidentifying one another in poor visibility. Orders are misunderstood or arrive out of sequence. A company halts at the wrong junction, waiting for support that is approaching a different objective entirely. Time, already scarce, is squandered in moments of hesitation measured in seconds but paid for in blood. The Allies understand tempo as a weapon. Once a foothold is gained, it must be reinforced immediately. Paratroopers hold ground not because it is comfortable, but because holding it prevents movement. Follow-on forces are guided toward success rather than opportunity. What begins as a fragile position becomes, within hours, something permanent. Each reinforcement compounds the advantage created earlier in the night. For the Germans, the nature of the fight changes without announcement. The original mission, prevent the landing, slips out of reach almost unnoticed. In its place emerges a more desperate task: limit the damage, contain the spread, salvage coherence from fragmentation. This shift is not ordered. It is felt, instinctively, as commanders realize that the clock can no longer be reset. The collapse unfolds not as a single failure, but as a series of moments that refuse to be recovered. A late movement here. A misdirected column there. Each seems minor when judged alone. Together, they bend the timeline irreversibly in the attacker's favor. Minutes lost early in the night now multiply into hours that cannot be reclaimed. By the time dawn approaches, the pattern is clear to those living inside it. The Germans are no longer reacting to an event. They are responding to consequences layered upon consequences. The invasion has passed from something that might be stopped into something that must be endured. What remains is the weight of accumulated delay, a realization that the decisive battle was not lost in a single engagement, but in the space between messages, orders, and belief. And as daylight begins to expose the terrain, it becomes evident that the struggle ahead will not be about reversing a landing, but about surviving what those lost minutes have already made inevitable. A bridge changes hands faster than a regiment can be ordered forward. In minutes, sometimes seconds, control passes from one side to the other. Yet its consequences unfold over days. Roads converge here. Columns funnel through narrow spans. Artillery, fuel, and men must all obey its geometry. Whoever holds the crossing does not merely occupy terrain, they decide who is allowed to move. In the early hours of the 6th of June, German defenders at such crossings fight with determination. They engage the enemy directly, at close range, often without knowing how isolated they already are. But their resistance is measured against something new, speed that has been calculated in advance. The airborne assault does not seek glory. It seeks possession. Its objective is not to destroy the defender, but to arrive first and remain. The seizure unfolds quickly because it is rehearsed. Landing zones are chosen for proximity. Routes are memorized. Orders are simple and narrow: reach the bridge, secure both ends, deny movement. Firefights are brief and violent, but they are not improvisations. The Germans react bravely, but reaction is always slower than arrival. By the time defenders understand what is at stake, the balance has already shifted. German countermoves begin almost immediately, but they begin too late. Units advance toward the objective without realizing how critical the timing has become. The first elements reach the outskirts only to discover that the crossing is no longer exposed. Allied troops have already brought up heavier weapons. Defensive positions are dug in with urgency born of understanding. The critical window, the brief moment when the bridge might have been contested rather than held, has closed. This is where the missed warning returns with quiet force. An earlier alert would not have guaranteed success, but it might have changed the nature of the fight. A reinforced defense. A prepared demolition. A counterattack arriving while the airborne troops were still forming. Instead, action lags behind reality. What could have been uncertain is now settled. Allied troops waste no time consolidating. They know that holding the objective is as important as taking it. Foxholes appear almost immediately. Fields of fire are cleared. Communications are established. The next hour matters more than the last. Every decision is made with the assumption that pressure is coming, and that survival depends on being ready before it arrives. As daylight approaches, the meaning of the capture becomes clearer. German movements are forced into longer routes. Columns bunch up, exposed to air attack. Reserves that might have counterattacked now hesitate, unsure whether alternative crossings exist or whether roads beyond are already compromised. The bridge does not merely block movement, it shapes it. A broader understanding begins to take hold on both sides. D-Day is not a single clash, nor even a sequence of clashes. It is an interlocking system of timings where success in one place magnifies success elsewhere. Airborne landings enable beach landings. Secured bridges enable supply. Supply enables momentum. Momentum turns arrival into permanence. For the Germans, the realization is sobering. The defense has not been pierced by overwhelming force, but by coordination. The failure lies not in courage, but in sequence. Actions occur in the wrong order, or at the right time, but in the wrong place. The system that required certainty before movement has been defeated by an enemy who designed uncertainty into the fight. The turning point now reveals itself. With inland gateways held, the beaches are transformed. What might have been killing grounds become entry points. What could have been isolated lodgements become connected fronts. The invasion acquires depth. From this moment onward, German defences must respond not to landings, but to an expanding machine already in motion. The bridge stands quietly amid the morning light, its importance invisible to those who do not need to move through it. Yet for both sides, its capture marks the moment when the night's confusion hardens into irreversible fact. The landing has succeeded not because of singular heroism, but because motion itself has been captured. And once movement is denied to one side and granted to the other, the shape of the war begins to change. Dawn lifts slowly over Normandy, and with it comes scale. What had been fragments in the dark now resolves into structure. Offshore, the sea is crowded with ships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, arranged not by chance, but by calculation. Overhead, aircraft trace deliberate paths, their presence constant, methodical. Inland, columns of men and vehicles move with purpose along roads that have already been claimed. The invasion, once theoretical, is now fully visible. For German units attempting to regain initiative, the character of the fight changes abruptly. Local counterattacks that might have succeeded hours earlier now meet a wall of fire unlike anything previously encountered. Naval guns reach far beyond the beaches, delivering precise, repeatable destruction coordinated with observers ashore. Artillery joins in, its fire adjusted by radio, corrected in real time. The sky itself becomes hostile, denying movement in daylight. The battlefield is no longer shaped by improvisation alone. It is shaped by logistics, by tonnage delivered per hour, by shells stockpiled offshore, by fuel and ammunition flowing along newly secured routes. German defenders continue to fight with skill and courage, but they are now engaged in a contest they cannot equal. They maneuver tactically, while the enemy maneuvers industrially. Any attempt at concentration draws attention from above. Columns that gather are spotted and dispersed. Roads that might have served as arteries become exposure points. German units that could have massed for a decisive blow are instead forced to fragment, breaking into smaller groups that move cautiously, often at night, often too late. Air power does not merely destroy, it reshapes behavior. Allied momentum builds almost imperceptibly, then all at once. Each secured road reduces friction for the next reinforcement. Each intact bridge multiplies capacity. What was difficult in the first hours becomes routine by the afternoon. Delays that once seemed manageable now compound disastrously for the defender. Time, already lost, accelerates against them. In one headquarters, a German commander studies reports that no longer offer hope of reversal. He understands that his problem is no longer tactical. It is temporal. He is not fighting enemy units as much as he is fighting their schedule. The Allies are not reacting, they are executing. Every phase unfolds as planned, and every plan assumes the previous one succeeded. This realization is sobering. Even effective resistance now only slows, never stops. A destroyed bridge delays a column, but alternative routes already exist. A local success creates no opening because there is no pause to exploit it. The enemy does not wait for outcomes, it absorbs them and continues moving. The climax of the battle emerges not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a mechanical truth. A system designed to move precisely on time is meeting a system designed to wait for certainty. The result is asymmetrical. German reactions arrive after decisions have already been made elsewhere. By the time permission is granted, the moment it was meant to address has passed. Industry now reveals its full weight. Replacement aircraft cycle in. Ships adjust position and continue firing. Supplies arrive not as reinforcements, but as inevitabilities. What began as an invasion now resembles a process steady, predictable, and difficult to interrupt. The battlefield rewards those who planned for continuity rather than brilliance. For the Germans, this is the final confirmation that the night's delays mattered. What could have been contested piecemeal is now locked in place by overwhelming support. Courage still exists at every level, but courage cannot erase timing. Nor can it outrun production. As the sky and earth merge into a single coordinated system, the character of the war in Normandy is decided. The decisive moment is no longer ahead, it has already passed. And those still fighting come to understand a hard truth: they are not facing an enemy who might arrive late, or falter, or pause. They are facing one designed never to be late again. As the morning advances, the German defensive line in Normandy begins to fracture, not in a single rupture, but in separated pieces. Cut telephone lines and late warnings carve the battlefield into pockets, each fighting its own war. These are not routes. They are islands of resistance, unaware of how much water now lies between them. From within, the unit's collapse does not feel like failure. It feels like dislocation. Flanks disappear without notice. Supporting units are no longer where doctrine says they should be. Orders arrive late or not at all. What once resembled a formation now exists only as a collection of positions, each clinging to its own logic of survival. Men continue to fight with discipline and resolve, but often in the wrong places. A crossroads is held long after it has lost strategic meaning. A hedgerow is defended fiercely, even as routes behind it are cut. Without a shared picture of the battlefield, bravery becomes inefficient. Effort is expended where it no longer influences the outcome. Withdrawals begin as measured movements, ordered to preserve strength. But geometry intervenes. Roads once assumed open are now controlled by the enemy. Detours lengthen, columns bunch up. What begins as a tactical retreat becomes a pursuit, not because the Germans panic, but because the enemy already occupies the spaces that define escape. Chases replace battles. Capture replaces destruction. Allied forces do not need to annihilate units that have lost their shape. They only need to close the exits. Each bridge held, each junction secured, turns motion into exposure. Men who might have reformed elsewhere instead lay down arms when movement becomes impossible. For the duty officer whose initial hesitation delayed the warning, the weight of consequence becomes personal. His mistake is unbearable precisely because it lacks drama. There was no betrayal, no refusal, no malice. Only a decision to wait. In war, such decisions are common. Their outcomes are not. The German defense now undergoes a subtle but decisive shift in purpose. The objective is no longer to stop the invasion. That moment has passed. The task becomes management, slowing the enemy, preserving what can be preserved, extracting units before they dissolve completely. Language changes in orders. Words like counterattack give way to delay and withdraw. This is the completion of the turning point. The loss of tempo is now absolute. Courage still exists in abundance, but it operates under debt. Every act of resistance must pay interest on time already lost, and the interest rate is unforgiving. Holding a position for an hour costs more than it did the night before. Moving a unit requires space that no longer exists. From above, the collapse may appear sudden. From within, it feels gradual and exhausting. Men fight, move, and fight again, only to discover that the geometry of the battlefield has shifted against them. The enemy does not need to outfight them everywhere. He only needs to be in the right places first. By midday, the truth is unavoidable. The unit has not failed in spirit or will. It has failed in structure. Once the shape is gone, cohesion cannot be restored quickly enough to matter. The battle has moved on, carrying momentum with it. What remains is endurance in a narrowing space. The invasion has become permanent, and the German response has become reactive. The story of collapse, often told in terms of morale, reveals itself here as something colder and more precise. This unit did not break because it was weak. It broke because the map no longer belonged to it. After D-Day, the front in Normandy hardens. What was fluid in the first hours becomes fixed by geography and arithmetic. Hedgerows divide the land into compartments measured in meters. Artillery calculations replace improvisation. Daily tallies, fuel delivered, shells fired, vehicles repaired, become as decisive as any maneuver. The battle settles into a rhythm that rewards endurance and punishes scarcity. German units continue to fight with skill and experience. Tactics are sound. Local leadership remains capable. But resources begin to thin, quietly at first. Fuel arrives late or not at all. Replacement vehicles are fewer than those lost. Infantry companies shrink without being formally reduced. Freedom of movement, the ability to choose when and where to engage, erodes steadily under Allied air superiority and control of key routes. The Allies, by contrast, expand methodically. This expansion does not rely on sudden breakthroughs, but on continuity. The gateways seized in the first hours, bridges, causeways, road junctions, now function as arteries. Supplies move inland with increasing efficiency. What was once a fragile beachhead becomes a system that feeds itself. Each additional ton delivered reduces the likelihood of reversal. Logistics shapes behavior on both sides. German commanders plan movements around fuel availability rather than tactical opportunity. Units are repositioned at night to avoid detection, then held in place during the day. The Allies reverse this pattern. They move when needed, protected by air cover, supported by artillery whose ammunition supply appears inexhaustible. Initiative shifts from the battlefield to the supply chain. Communication remains decisive, but its meaning evolves. Early in the invasion, the critical question was whether reports were believed. Now it is whether they can be acted upon. German signals intelligence still functions, but concentration becomes difficult when movement itself is dangerous. Seeing first no longer guarantees striking first. The Allies, seeing first, can also reinforce first. The earlier missed warning is reinterpreted in this context. It is no longer viewed as a singular error, but as a symptom of a system already stretched thin. Command structures designed to prevent panic struggle under sustained pressure. The demand for certainty collides with a reality that offers none. Delay becomes cumulative, and the margin for recovery disappears. On the ground, German soldiers adapt in small human ways. They learn that survival depends on orders, but also on timing. Sometimes hearing nothing means stay still. Sometimes it means withdraw quietly before the road is closed. Discipline now includes discretion, an unspoken understanding of when the system can no longer support the individual. The Allies learn their own lessons. Progress is not always visible, but it is measurable. A village taken today shortens tomorrow's supply route. A repaired bridge increases tomorrow's tonnage. The machine grows heavier with each success, harder to stop, harder even to slow. Attrition becomes asymmetric. Losses are felt on both sides, but only one side can replace them predictably. As weeks pass, the illusion of containment fades. German counterattacks still occur, some with initial success, but they lack follow-through. The space to exploit gains does not exist. The Allies absorb shock and continue advancing because the structure behind them remains intact. Momentum is no longer a feeling. It is an outcome of logistics. Consequence settles in gradually. There is no single moment when defeat is acknowledged, only a narrowing of options. The missed warning from the night of 6th of June now appears distant, almost abstract. Yet its effects are embedded everywhere, in the roads that cannot be used, in the bridges that cannot be retaken, in the supply flows that cannot be interrupted. The war's outcome is not decided by one failure, but by many small ones layered together. A delayed report, a missed junction, a late reserve. Each seems survivable at the moment it occurs. Together, they move the future forward inexorably. Normandy is no longer a battlefield in the traditional sense. It is a machine, fed by fuel, steel, and information, grinding steadily onward. And for those caught inside it, the realization is stark. The decisive moments have already passed, not with a collapse, but with a quiet accumulation of minutes that can never be reclaimed. In the weeks and months that follow, the war is reduced to paper. After-action reports replace gunfire. Maps are redrawn with cleaner lines than reality ever allowed. Blame, when it appears, is not poetic. It is expressed in timestamps, grid references, and phrases like message received or no further action taken. The language is precise, restrained, and unforgiving in its neutrality. Within this record, the duty officer becomes a footnote, if he appears at all. His decision is not described as failure, but as sequence. A report logged at 0016, escalation delayed, confirmation awaited. The document does not ask what he felt in that moment, or what he feared might happen if he acted too soon. Paper has no patience for doubt, yet the question lingers beyond the files. What is guilt when the mistake is ordinary? When it follows training rather than defies it? The officer did not disbelieve the report. He did not suppress it out of malice or arrogance. He hesitated because hesitation had been taught as responsibility. In another night, that same caution might have prevented chaos. War, however, does not judge intentions. It judges outcomes. It punishes delay more reliably than malice, and it rewards speed more often than wisdom. The officer's error is not that he chose wrongly in a moral sense, but that he chose slowly in a system where time had become the decisive currency. The chain of command that once demanded certainty now confronts the limits of that demand. On the night of the invasion, certainty was unavailable. Reports arrived faster than belief could form. The structure designed to filter truth from noise instead filtered out urgency. Responsibility, distributed across layers of authority, became difficult to locate precisely because everyone had followed procedure. The story oscillates between scales. On one level, entire armies are moving, divisions advancing, fronts shifting, supply lines extending deeper into France. On another, a single moment remains frozen, a man listening to a radio, deciding whether a message matters enough to disturb the order of things. That contrast gives the moment its enduring weight. Technology re-enters the story not as solution, but as mirror. Radios transmitted accurate information. The signal itself was not flawed. What failed was the conversion of sound into action. Machines can deliver truth instantly, but they cannot compel belief. They cannot override culture, training, or fear of consequence. The gap between hearing and acting remains human. For the officer, Memory does not arrive as accusation. It arrives quietly, in the knowledge that no correction is possible, that the bridge was taken, that the reserves moved too late, that the unit broke apart not because anyone fled, but because time did not wait. His role in that chain is small, but it is real, and therefore impossible to dismiss. Modern war leaves little room for individual absolution. Decisions are embedded in systems, yet outcomes are borne by people. Ethics become inseparable from process. Who hears first matters. Who decides matters. Who is authorized to act without permission matters most of all. Responsibility is no longer a single burden, but a distributed one, lighter for each participant, heavier in total. The officer's story is not unique, and that is its significance. Similar moments unfold in every large conflict, unnoticed until their consequences accumulate. They rarely produce villains. They produce lessons, often learned too late. The war moves on, indifferent to reflection, while those left behind must live with it. In the end, the officer is neither condemned nor celebrated. He becomes a measure, a reminder that in mechanized war, morality is often exercised in seconds, not speeches. That the most consequential decisions are sometimes the quietest ones. And that history is shaped as much by what was not done in moments of uncertainty as by what was done in moments of courage. Somewhere in the archive, his report remains unchanged. The words are still exact. The time is still recorded. And within that precision lies the unresolved truth of modern war, that responsibility does not always announce itself at the moment it is acquired. It reveals itself only after everything else has already moved on. Return finally to the beginning. A dim room, a shaded lamp, a radio set humming softly as it warms the air around it. At 00:16 hours, a message crackles through the static, uncertain, incomplete, yet unmistakably human. A man listens. He weighs the sound against experience, against procedure, against the quiet authority of habit. And in that brief pause, he decides whether it matters. Place that moment beside what followed. Bridges held through the night and into the morning. Roads taken and turned into arteries of supply. Units fragmented not by panic, but by separation. The battlefield that emerges by dawn bears little resemblance to the assumptions of the previous evening. What was once theoretical has become fixed. What was once preventable has become permanent. The irony at the heart of the story is stark, but not theatrical. Germany invested immense effort into building defences of concrete and steel. The Atlantic Wall rose along the coast as a visible promise of resistance, calculated to endure bombardment and repel assault. Yet the decisive failure did not come from shattered bunkers or overwhelmed guns. It came from minutes lost, from perception lagging behind reality. This is not a story of incompetence nor of cowardice. It is a story of systems behaving exactly as they were designed to behave, carefully, methodically, and too slowly. The warning was real. The danger was present. What failed was the conversion of awareness into motion at the moment when motion still mattered. Most collapses do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with a single explosion or a dramatic retreat. They begin quietly before anyone is prepared to name them. A delayed report, a confirmation requested, a reserve held back for clarity that never comes. By the time collapse is visible, it has already been underway for hours. Seen this way, collapse is not an event, but a process. It begins with loss of information, reports that arrive fragmented, or are believed too late. It continues with loss of coordination, units acting alone, without a shared picture. It ends with loss of time, the one resource that cannot be replenished once spent. Each stage feeds the next, until recovery becomes impossible regardless of courage or intent. The lesson extends beyond Normandy. Modern war magnifies the importance of seconds because it compresses distance, accelerates movement, and multiplies consequence. Machines carry information faster than ever before, but they do not decide what to do with it. That burden remains human. Between hearing and acting lies a space where history turns. In that space, morality is rarely clear. Decisions are made under uncertainty, shaped by training and fear of error. The duty officer did not know he was standing at a hinge of history. He believed, as he had been taught, that restraint was safer than haste. The system around him reinforced that belief. When the outcome proved otherwise, responsibility became diffuse, shared, obscured, and difficult to resolve. Yet history has a way of clarifying what the moment itself could not. With the benefit of distance, the pattern emerges. The invasion succeeded not only because of Allied firepower, but because of Allied timing. It failed for the defenders not only because of material disadvantage, but because of delayed belief. The two are inseparable. In mechanized war, a message is not merely sound. It is survival converted into seconds. Each second carries weight, not because it is dramatic, but because it is cumulative. Enough of them, lost quietly, can unbalance entire formations. Enough of them, gained early, can decide campaigns. The radio crackle fades. The room returns to stillness. Outside, the night that once seemed manageable has already changed shape. Men are moving. Decisions are locking into place. The future is no longer waiting to be confirmed. And long after the guns fall silent, the story remains, not as accusation, but as caution. A reminder that history often turns on moments that feel unremarkable at the time. That the most decisive failures are sometimes indistinguishable from routine. And that in war, the difference between defense and collapse can be measured not in bravery, but in minutes. They feared Allied firepower, yet it was a missed warning that broke them first.